A very warm welcome to you all, and it's so good to see so many of you this afternoon. For those of you that I haven't met before, my name is Alex Tier. I'm the Diocesan Director of Education, and I lead the education team here at the Diocese of Guildford. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we make a start. I'm informed by the hotel staff that there is no planned fire alarm this afternoon, he says. So if you do hear the alarms, then we will need to go out of this exit here. And those of you towards the back room out and then onto the front of the hotel. We're aiming to finish between 6 and 15 tonight, so 6 to 6:15. We've started slightly late, so we may just go over the 6 o'clock period. But do feel free to stay on and network and talk to colleagues after the event if you would like to. So this afternoon is our Academy Trust briefings, and it's really good to see so many people here. I suspect we might have to do another one of these, but this is a good starting point for us as a diocese. So the aims of the briefings are to have the opportunity to find out more about the benefits of your church school joining a multi-academy trust, and in a moment I'll explain and introduce the Academy Trust representatives, the trust leaders who are with us today. The second aim is to consider the changes to the educational landscape and the strategic decisions required to ensure the future of your church school. And then the final piece, which really is the piece which is to do with the diocese itself, is to understand the responsibilities of the DBE and our 3 key priorities in our shaping our future strategy. So that's our sort of programme and our aims this afternoon. In terms of what that looks like, in a moment, I can see Bishop Jo just arrived, so I'll give her a moment just to catch her breath. But in a moment, Bishop Jo will speak briefly, and then I'm delighted to be able to welcome and also introduce Leora Cruddas, who is the Chief Executive of the Confederation of Schools Trust. And Leora comes with a wealth of knowledge of the academy sector and will be talking to us for about 25 minutes. After that, there will be a time for questions to Leora, which we'll spend a bit of time on. And then after that, we're then going to move to a panel which will include the trust representatives of the 5 trusts in the diocese, and also Paul Schofield, who is with us from the Department of Education, the Deputy Regional Schools Commissioner. The format of the panel will be, I'm going to ask some of the trust leaders to answer some generic questions, which the type of questions that I tend to get asked as I go around schools talking to governors and school leaders. And then at the end of it, we're hoping that there will be a chance to take some questions from the floor as well. And then the final piece will just be talking about what might be the next steps for you as a school, as a governing body, as a school leader, working together with us to shape our future together. So I hope that's clear in terms of where we're starting, and I can see Bishop Jo just arriving and coming up front to talk to us.
There are more seats at the front. Come on, go on, be bold.
Perfect time. Thank you, Bishop Jo.
Thank you, Alex. I'm relieved to be here. I'm utterly thrilled to see real faces, not in their boxes. The first thing I want to say, given that this is the first chance I've had to meet many of you in 2 years, is just to stand back and marvel that you're still here. Thank you. Every Thursday night, formally I was clapping for the NHS. In practice, I was thinking of you guys on the front line. I'm thinking particularly of head teachers, but there are chairs of governors and other foundation governors here as well. That you're still standing or sitting amidst so much is wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for all you do. Of course, we're here because there are strategic things on the horizon that we need to attend to. I know that you're immersed in keeping a school open operationally, and it is really, really hard to look beyond the worries of today to the issues of tomorrow. But I'm here because I think we wouldn't be fulfilling our responsibility as a diocese to you to help support church schools if we weren't looking to the further horizon, not just keeping your school open this week, but next year and beyond. And I want to say that this is not a conspiracy to close down small village schools. This is a longing to keep every village school open. That is why we are here, to support you, because sustainability is a real issue. The last thing I want to say is our responsibility as a diocese to you and your church school may formally be limited to the Christian character, to the way we live out the distinctiveness of the label church school, but it is in our interests, precisely because we are Christians and we believe in the Christian character of your school, that it is a school that flourishes in every aspect, that it is excellent, that it serves the whole community, not just the Christians. And so, to keep your school flourishing, we long that you will address on your governing body these strategic questions in order that we collaborate the more deeply. Over to Alex. Oh no, I was going to pray, wasn't I? Shall we pray about this? This is my favourite prayer. It's a Lutheran prayer. I think it will explain itself. Lord God, you have called your servants to ventures of which we cannot see the ending, by paths as yet untrodden, through perils unknown. Give us faith to go out with good courage, not knowing where we go, but only that your hand is leading us and your love supporting us. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Thank you very much, Bishop Jane. So we're going to get on with the afternoon now, and as I said earlier, it's our great pleasure to welcome and introduce Leora Crevis. I first heard Leora speak, I think, 2 or 3 years ago. How long has CST been going, Leora? 3 years, that's right. At the National Conference for Church of England Schools, where Leora spoke very passionately about the role of academy trusts and school trusts, as we now call them, in the sector. So I think she's perfectly placed to come and talk to us this afternoon. So Leora's going to speak for about 20-25 minutes, and then we'll take some questions after that. So over to you, Leora.
Colleagues, it's absolutely delightful to be here with you today. Thank you so much, Alex, for the invitation and for those beautiful opening words from Bishop Joe. I would just like to echo Bishop Joe's sentiment around thanks. It's astonishing what you've done, absolutely astonishing. I think you are a national treasure. I think you are national heroes as much as any of the staff on the front line of the NHS. I think that the extraordinary acts of heroism and courage that we've seen from you during the global pandemic really just needs to be acknowledged in that way. So thank you, Bishop Joe, for that beautiful message. I also want to echo what Bishop Joe said about the position of small schools, and you use the word longing, the longing for those schools to be part of the family, to be sustainable, to be kept open, to do the really, really important work that you do in your communities. And I hope it's to those sorts of messages that I will speak today. So I've chosen not to use a PowerPoint presentation or slides, because I think sometimes that can be a little bit of a distraction. So I wanted to speak openly and plainly to you. Perhaps not all of the things I say will be welcoming to everybody in this audience, and I'm completely up for your challenge. So in the Q&A bits, if there are things that I've said that you don't agree with or that you want to talk or challenge, please feel absolutely comfortable to do that. The future of your schools is fundamentally important, and it is absolutely right that if you have concerns, if there are things that are worrying you, about making those strategic decisions, that you are able to say them. In fact, it is more than right, it is your duty to be able to voice any concerns that you have. So I wanted to start off by just saying a little bit about CST, the Confederation of School Trusts, why I started CST, why I founded it, and what it is. So we are the sector body for academy and multi-academy trusts in England. We have, as Alex said, been around for 3 years now. So we founded CST in October 2018. So at least half of our life has been in the context of the global pandemic, which has been an interesting journey. Now, a sector body might be new language for you, and certainly it is not well understood in our sector. So if I can ask you perhaps to think of the NHS Confederation, or the Association of Colleges, or indeed even the CBI, those are sector bodies. We are fundamentally different from a trade union. My background is formerly as a director of, well, first of all, as an English teacher. That's what I am, first and foremost. But I spent a lot of years as a director of education in East London. And then I joined the Association of School and College Leaders, which is the trade union for school and college leaders. So I'm going to say that we are fundamentally different from a trade union, but I mean no disrespect to trade unions in that, because I was once a trade union official. The trade union is set up to represent its members as employees. Absolutely right too. They do a fundamentally important job in our system. The sector body, though, does not do that. It doesn't represent individuals. The sector body represents trusts as organisations. So we speak authoritatively to government on behalf of academy and multi-academy trusts in England. And we work across governance leadership, so the trust board, and executive leadership to do that. So in September of 2019, which was before the last local election, we published our white paper, which set out the future shape of the English education system. At that time, we argued for the power of a group of schools working together in a single governance arrangement with very strong senses of accountability. That is still our position. At the time as well, we started to develop a new narrative for school trusts. So we said that school trusts create the conditions for deep collaboration among teachers and leaders. And that is really, because it continues to be really important to everything that we do. So we are interested in getting out beyond political ideology, and frankly, I'm not interested in academisation. I don't care about academisation. I'm interested in the power of a group of schools working together, such that teachers and leaders can work together in this spirit of deep collaboration, of solidarity, to improve the quality of education for the children and young people that the organisation serves. We also said at that time, and I'll talk a bit more about this today, that the school trust is a new form of civic structure. So you may have heard some of the arguments from the Anti-Academy Alliance, which has dominated our public discourse, I think, and the public imagination, that in fact what we are is the commodification of education, or the privatisation of education, or the marketisation of education. We are none of these things. We are first and foremost education charities with a single legal and also moral purpose to advance education for public benefit. That is what we are, that is what we do. And I'll keep coming back to that core moral purpose, which is also at the heart of the Articles of Association. So I believe this is an insurgent mission, this notion of the group of schools working together in the spirit of deep and purposeful collaboration. Then in January 2020, which was just prior to the global pandemic, we published a paper called Systems of Meaning. So in that paper, we looked at the systems of meaning within which school trusts are located, and we identified 3 leadership narratives. And I want to spend a little bit of time exploring these leadership narratives in the hope that they resonate with you and they go back to moral purpose. So the first is about trust leadership. That's leadership of your organisation. It's the way that we talk about ourselves and what we do. But it is also very purposeful in the sense of creating the conditions for this deep and purposeful collaboration. So I think that in terms of the colleagues who are here who are trust leaders, who are CEOs, it is part of your job to work with me to change society's conversations about the important work that we do. And we've still got a little bit of way to go here. So I think this narrative, this first leadership narrative of trust leadership, speaks also and builds on the Church of England's vision for education. I have to say I really love the Church of England's vision for education, and I think it speaks to a much wider audience than just the sort of the church ethos. So educating for wisdom, for knowledge and skills, educating for hope and aspiration, educating for community and living well together, and educating for dignity and respect. So trust leadership, the leadership of your organisation, is in our view necessary, fundamentally necessary, that we get this right, this leadership narrative right, that we do this well, and the public trust us to do this. But in my view, it is not sufficient. We cannot just be isolated organisations standing in splendid isolation on the own hill of our trust. We must also work together. So our second leadership narrative is about civic leadership, how we work with others to advance education as a wider common good. Civic trusts, in my view, create the opportunities for deep and purposeful collaboration among trusts. So if trusts create the conditions for deep and purposeful collaboration between and among schools, civic trusts work together also in the spirit of collaboration. So school trust is a new form of civic structure, as I say, works to disrupt this narrative about corporatisation and privatisation, but it also helps us to recalibrate our relationship with local government. And that seems to me to be really important. I think we have to recognise the democratic responsibility and accountability and legitimacy of local government. And there's some parts of the trust sector that has seen its roles very much to come out of local government. So we may be legally separate organisations from local government, but we have a civic duty to work together to protect the value of the child in society, the quality of education locally, so that no school and indeed no child is left behind, and that there is a coherent public services offer that's particularly important in the context of the global pandemic. So Surrey, I understand, as a local authority, are positioning themselves in an interesting space. They are not going to step into the space of telling you what your future should be. They want this to be about self-determination, you determining the future of your school in the Surrey context. I think that's fine, but it is also necessary to take action to ensure that no school is left behind. So I'm interested in the Dyson position, which is to respect schools' rights to self-determination, to respect your right to self-determination. But I think you also have a responsibility, as does the diocese, to scan the horizon and to act before any school, indeed your school, becomes vulnerable. So it's incredibly important in this context to be both intentional and strategic. And as Bishop Jones said, of course, the immediate priorities, the immediate operational responsibilities of keeping your schools open could well get in the way of this wider strategic vision. But as leaders, I think you need to scan the horizon as well. You need to be shoring up the future for your school, not just the operational realities that you face at the moment. I know you heard, or some of you would have heard Maggie Farrar speak a few weeks ago, and I think she cited Steve Mumby's words. The move towards all schools being part of a group is voluntary but inevitable. Voluntary but inevitable. And it's this future that I'm asking you to seize. This brings us to CST's third narrative. So our first one is about trust leadership, our second one is about civic leadership, and our third one is about system leadership. So this is not in the old National College's definition of working beyond the school gates, but rather how we need to act on our local systems, not just act in our local systems. So I'm asking you to be very strategic here, to step away from the leadership of your school or your organisation and to take a view across the local system. So system leadership, this third narrative, goes beyond collaboration for me. This is a narrative about system building, deliberate and intentional system building. And I think in part that is what you are in this room here to do today. So I'm inviting you to act on your local system today and to do so in a collaborative manner, to build this system together. All three of these leadership narratives, so trust leadership, civic leadership, system leadership, are underpinned by ethics, by the principles of public life. So I said before I founded CST, I worked for the Association of School and College Leaders, ASCL, as their Director of Policy and Public Relations. And the very last thing I did before I left ASCL was set up the Commission on Ethical Leadership. So I believe both governance and executive leaders must act solely in the interests of children and young people. I'm going to stop there for a minute. I'm going to talk a little bit about the pernicious use of the word autonomy. I don't like the word autonomy. I know it was part of the early narrative, in the sort of 2010, 2011, which was about the formation of our sector, that we were becoming autonomous institutions. I don't like the word autonomy for this reason. I very seldom, if ever, hear it used in the interests of children and young people. I hear it used to shore up adult interest and to shore up institutional interest, but not to take decisions that are right for children and young people. So I would invite you to think a little bit about that. I'm more interested in the notion of interconnectedness, of collaboration, and of solidarity. So that's the first thing. So you must act solely in the interests of children and young people, the first principle of public life. You must avoid placing yourselves under any obligation to any organisation or any individual that would try to inappropriately influence you in your work. You must act and take decisions impartially and fairly on the basis of the best possible evidence. You must be accountable to the public for the decisions you make, and you must expect for those decisions and for your actions to be subject to external scrutiny. You must expect to make decisions in an open and transparent manner. You must be truthful, and most importantly, the seventh principle of public life, you must exhibit these principles in your own behaviour. So I give you this in the context of now going on to talk about how we build together a bridge to the future. So the global pandemic has highlighted the role of public services and the value of education in society. Individually, the spotlight on education and the challenges of COVID-19 have prompted widespread reflection on a range of education issues, on curriculum, on assessment, on accountability, on the role of technology, to name a few. It is likely that the effects of COVID-19 will be felt for a long while yet. I reckon a generation. Beyond the educational impacts, and we're all talking about education recovery, aren't we? But beyond the educational impacts, there are also the economic impacts on our children and families. There are the social impacts, and there are the health impacts, including the mental health impacts. If we are to address these negative legacies of COVID-19, we will need robust policies, and we will need robust organisations. We will need the group of schools. The organisations with capacity to continue to cope with both the current and future perturbations, We're still in the pandemic, right? We're still in a pandemic response. I hope at some point soon we will get to a post-pandemic response, but those impacts will be felt for a generation. So we cannot limp on, in my view, with lack of coherence, a refusal to take a close look at our education system and the two-tiered nature of that education system. We must be ambitious in our goal to build strong and sustainable school trusts, a strong and sustainable system where all schools are part of the group. So we have called on not just government, but indeed on Parliament to outline this ambitious vision for the education system. And I'm very pleased that the Secretary of State, as was, used our conference to set out this government's ambition. But as I said to you, I'm not interested in political ideology. CST is a charity and a membership organisation. We exist to advocate for you, to represent your voices, but we are also entirely politically neutral. So I'm interested in getting out beyond the political ideology and to make the evidence-informed case, the educational arguments for the power of a group of schools. So structures are important, I think, because they create this robustness. They're the vehicle, in my view, for continuously improving the quality of education. But we must not make the mistake that I think we've made for the last 10 years in believing that structures themselves are the panacea. They are not. It is the enabling conditions that the structure creates and the ability to focus exclusively on the quality of education. That is what is fundamentally important. The core business of our schools: curriculum, assessment, pedagogy, behaviour, welfare. So, I think we're going to have to work together to shape this system over the next decade. The previous Secretary of State was not intending on putting an arbitrary deadline on this, so this is different from the 2016 position. If you remember the failed 2016 white paper, when the then Secretary of State, Nicky Morgan, said that she would pass legislation to require all schools to academise, and she said she would do that within a particular time horizon, which in my view was completely unworkable. This is not that. This is making the case for us being in control of our own destiny, of shaping the future of our local systems. So I want to come now to why I think the school trust, the group of organisations working together, is so important. Because I think the trust is a knowledge-building organisation. I think the trust can do what schools alone will find it difficult to do. They can do improvement at scale. So we've recently published a paper in which we've articulated 4 propositions on how you do school improvement to scale. And they are these. The first is that the goal has to be for every teacher in every classroom to be as good as they can be in what they teach, in other words, the curriculum, and how they teach, in other words, pedagogy. For this to happen, we need to mobilise for every teacher the best evidence from research, hence the knowledge building. Our hypothesis is, so our proposition 3, there is no improvement for pupils, or no sustained improvement for pupils, without improvement in teaching, and no improvement in teaching without the best professional development for teachers and other staff. And our 4th proposition is it is these strong structures, in other words, group of schools, that can facilitate the best professional development and thus secure better teaching and improvement for pupils. So I'm going to end with an anecdote. A couple of years ago, before the pandemic, I was on a public panel with Sir Kevin Collins, who you may know, previously the Government's Recovery Commissioner, but before that, the Chief Executive of the EDF. And he said to me, Laura, do you think we are the best system at getting better? Difficult question. Fortunately, he didn't wait for my response. He said, I can tell you we are not. I think he's probably right. I think we're not yet the best system at getting better. But I'm endlessly intrigued by this question. How can we in England be the best system at getting better? Well, by building groups of schools, by being robust, by doing better school improvement, and by putting quality of education at the heart of everything we do. So why is all of this important? And I always end on this, because in the words of the late, great Kofi Annan, who was Secretary General of the United Nations, in his foreword to the state of the world's children in the year 2000, he said in an almost prescient way, there is no trust more sacred than the one the world holds with children. There is no duty more important than ensuring that their rights are respected, that their welfare is protected, that their lives are free from fear and want, and that they grow up in peace. Never was that more true than in a post-pandemic period. This is CST's single value statement, holding trust with children. As you build your local system, as you collaborate to act on the system, not just in it, I would invite you to put that sacred bond of trust that we have with children at the centre of all that you do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Leora, for articulating so passionately the place and development of our education system as we move forward. Before we take questions for Leora, I'm going to just give you a couple of minutes just with your neighbour, just to talk about what you've heard Leora say, and then because we've got a roving mic, I'm going to, if you'd like to ask questions of Leora, I'll come amongst you and you can ask your questions before we move to the panel. So lots and lots of, I can feel the kind of energy in the room. Would anyone like to kick us off with a question for Leora about what she's spoken to us this evening? Don't be shy. Yes, great. Do you mind coming to the microphone?
I think what Leora said was fab, and I completely agree with the principles. What was missing for me was the element of finance, and I think that lots of the schools that are in here are actually here because they're being driven here by finance. But lots of schools are working together. They have been working together. They're working on school improvement. The push towards academisation comes because of the dire states that their finances are in.
That's absolutely right and incredibly helpful. And in 25 minutes, I probably couldn't address every reason why I think a school should join a group. So they're twin issues for me about educational sustainability and financial sustainability. I worry a little bit that for the last 10 years, too much of the narrative has been about financial sustainability, which is why I focus a little bit more on the educational sustainability piece. But you are 100% correct that it is the financial sustainability that allows us to actually focus on the quality of education and do the school improvement. That is absolutely right. Of course, we also need our schools and trusts to be properly funded, right? So we're making that case too. But you're right to say that the structure of the group does offer more security in terms of financial sustainability too. Do you want to come back at me on that? Have I answered your question appropriately, or do you want to say something more about it?
I just haven't witnessed that. I haven't witnessed how the trust structure offers greater security and financial security.
Okay. So in part this is about the greater leverage of public funding. So an organisation that has got more public funding can make decisions more strategically about how to improve the schools. Some of that will be a back office imperative. So I'm going to give examples without making anybody feel any particular role feel vulnerable. But there are some roles that are duplicated across schools. And so within a trust context, that duplication can over time, not like immediately, but over time through natural wastage be taken out, and that then allows more investment in the front line. Some of you will know my deputy Steve, so he visited the Northern Academies Trust today, and particularly the North Shore Academy, which is in a very deprived part of Darlington. North Shore Academy has never been good in its history. It is now an outstanding school, as of its inspection in July. And that it puts that down to the fact that it is part of this strong structure, this group of schools. And one of the things that Steve was saying to me, I was speaking to him on the phone on the train into Guildford, was he was fascinated by the fact that the trust, before it became fashionable to do so, was using its greater strategic capacity to invest in tutoring. And it's done so very effectively. And that is in part how they account for the sort of outcomes they're seeing in the community. So there are definitely ways in which the trust can act more strategically to create savings, but not savings, to put into reserves or give back to the DfE. Savings that then can be invested in the front line, in children and young people, as the Northern Education Trust have done. So there are some quite compelling examples of that now.
Thank you, Leora. We will come back to, there's going to be some themes tonight, and finance is one of them. We'll pick that up in the panel a bit later, in a moment, and also at the end. I think it was a feature of the Surrey Conference, wasn't it, about the different options that schools were being presented with. So we're very mindful of that. Other questions, colleagues?
Thank you. You propose that trust should exhibit civic leadership in terms of stepping in before schools become vulnerable or unviable. How would a trust know what sort of information do they obtain? How do they obtain it in order that they demonstrate their civic duty by looking at the pupils in their area who may be within vulnerable schools? How is that information transmitted, and how do they act on it without the brokerage of perhaps some other authority?
So we've got RSCs in the room today, or colleagues from the RSC office. Often it is through the good services of the RSC's office that trusts are approached in that sort of brokering way. In other cases, it's schools that know that they are not sustainable on their own, that do their own due diligence and determine which trust they want to join. So I think it's only the point of really doing due diligence that trust can be sure. The other thing, just to be entirely honest and candid about this, is that trustees have company law duties and charity law duties, and they have to make sure the decisions they take don't make their organisation vulnerable financially or educationally. That is, it's actually a legal duty, particularly under company law, but also in relation to charity law. So one of the tensions that we've got in the system is how you take forward the kind of moral imperative so that no school and no child is left behind, but also your fiduciary duties as a trustee. These things are in tension, and I think what we have to say is, and what we are saying to the Treasury through the spending review, is that we need to create strategic investment funds so that where there are these cases where schools are choosing to be financially sustainable or unviable, there's some form of strategic investment that can be made to support a trust board to not be conflicted in a way that I just described. Was that what was beneath your question? Was it?
Plus the perhaps lack of accurate self-evaluation on the part of vulnerable schools.
Yes, so absolutely. That is very often what trusts find when they start to do their due diligence. They find that an individual school on occasion is actually more more financially vulnerable. And that's not because the school has lied, it's sometimes because the school hasn't quite understood the vulnerability of its own situation. That is why due diligence on behalf of the Trust Board is absolutely important. But I think we have to weigh that against this duty to make sure that we are acting for the whole system, not just for the children and families in the organisation where we have schools whose communities we serve.
Thank you, Leora. I've got time for one more question.
So while finances are a big reason we're here, I was actually quite compelled to hear non-financial reasons about joining the trust. And I feel I've heard too much talk around premises and finance and not enough around children's education, so I really liked that. But just then linking that to the idea of school improvement and that maybe being the first and foremost role of the Multi Academy Trust, what I'm wondering then is why we're thinking the model for driving that school improvement is better as part of a MAT, and what the accountability there is and why that is stronger than in a group of local authority schools versus schools working together. And that's where I'd really like to sort of have that compelling argument.
So a challenging question, absolutely right though that you should ask it. So how is a trust, how is the school improvement that's driven in a trust different from the school improvement that's driven through a local authority? So I'm not going to cast aspersions on local authorities. Most of my professional life has been working in local government. There's some key differences, I think, between what a trust can do and what a local authority can do. First of all, a trust is set up to do just one thing, to run and improve schools. A local authority is set up to do a myriad of things. I mean, at the highest level, it's both an administrative and a political entity. Those two things get conflated all the time, which drives me slightly mad. But it has, a range of duties. The housing authority, it's the plumbing authority, it manages the waste contract. A local authority is not set up, in my view, to run and improve schools. And I would give you this analogy. Would we think it's a good idea for a local authority to maintain GP surgeries? You think that's a good idea? But instinctively we don't. And why do we instinctively not think that's a good idea? Because we understand that a GP surgery is a specialist organisation requiring specialist clinical governance. And I think there's a direct parallel here with schools. In relation to school improvement services that local authorities run, and again, no aspersions on local authority school improvement services, I've run them myself. But what tends to happen is that local authority school improvement services tend to take people out of schools and put them in a school improvement service. So the idea then, the mindset, the mental model, is that somebody from outside of your school, from outside of your organisation, comes in and advises you. Now, Ofsted did a really interesting report on this, which is published just before the pandemic, unfortunately called Stuck Schools, where they talked about the huge proliferation of school improvement services and school improvement people and school improvement initiatives. And what they found is that there was inconsistent quality. And even where the quality was high, the people who were advising the school very often didn't agree with each other. So that is a difficult place to be. I think we've seen the shift in a mental model, the shift in a mindset towards a belief that actually school improvement is done best within an organisation, where there is a professional community, where in many cases those responsible for improvement are still teaching. So I think there's quite a big difference between the kind of improvement that can be done in a trust and the kind of improvement that can be done in a local authority. So this is the more contentious one. As a director of improvement, there is no way that I could bring my head teachers together in a room like this and say, right, there's some fantastic and compelling evidence now on curriculum. I think that we should all approach curriculum in this way. Or how about we co-construct the way that we do curriculum? No, you can do that in trust. So that the core business of the trust is the same as the core business of the school, because the school basically is the trust, and can focus on the things that matter most, on curriculum, on pedagogy, on behaviour, and you can work within a professional community, within a disciplinary community, to make those things count in a way that, as a Director of Education, I couldn't have done.
Great, thank you, Leora. We're going to give you a bit of a break. So if you want to just take a seat, and then I'm going to invite the 5 trust leaders from our Fife Academy Trust to come and join us up at the front as part of our panel, and just ask them very briefly to introduce themselves. I'm also going to introduce Paul Schofield, who is the Deputy Director of the Regional Schools Commissioner's Office. So Paul, if you'd like to come and join us as well. Simon, are you with us? Fantastic, thank you. Just making sure we've got the right number of chairs. So I'm just going to hand over to the trust leaders and to Paul just to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started with the questions. You won't be surprised to know that some of the questions that you've already asked are some of the questions that we're going to ask the trust leaders about as well. So over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Hills. I'm the CEO of the Alliance Multi-Academy Trust, otherwise known as TAMAT. We've been going since 2018. We were 5 schools that wanted to come together. Originally, we explored up to about 10 or 12 people in Surrey Heath, and over time, it was the 5 schools that went for it. And we're delighted to be working together.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Paul Kennedy. I'm Chief Executive of Good Shepherd Trust. So we're the original Diocese MAT, founded in 2013. I've been with the Trust since 2020. And we have 16 schools all over the diocese, and we are now in 4 hubs. So probably the hub leaders knocking as well.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Schofield. I'm the Deputy Regional Schools Commissioner for the South London South East region from DFE. I've been in post now since about April, so quite new to the New Style Academies programme, but I actually worked on the original Sponsored Academies programme under Devendra Adonis and Bruce Eddington, people like that, right back under New Labour. And it's amazing to sort of see the difference in the programme now, because as Leora was saying, it was very much about autonomy and breaking free of the dead hand of local government and all that kind of language. And I think we've moved now into a much better position around collaboration, working together for the greater good. So that's nice to be here, and thanks for having me.
I'm Simon Jarvis. I'm CEO of Prospect Trust. We've been a trust, I guess, for 3 and a bit years. Began with a large 6-form college, which had been an incorporated body for many years. Added a local secondary school, and as of April this year, we're delighted to add a Church of England junior school into the Multi-Academy Trust, and that's given us the opportunity to work with children from year 3 right through to 18, 19 years old in the community. And a fantastic experience working with the diocese, and that's why I'm here tonight, because Alex told me to come.
He told me to come as well. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Catherine Kronicki. I'm trust leader for the Newark Trust. That's based over in Woking. I say trust old hands. We converted originally as a single academy trust, and very quickly realised actually about the strength of working together in partnership. The pandemic has come along, but we are certainly looking at developing our church trust and working in partnership with many of our church schools.
Hello, finally, I'm Mike Boddington, so I'm trust leader of the Enlightened Learning Trust, which is 2, soon to become 4 schools. It started in around 2014, and we have a secondary school, and soon we'll have 3 schools in the primary phase that are joining us. So very exciting times.
Thank you all. So this format is probably familiar to you. It's a bit like question time, okay? So not a good replication of Fiona Bruce, but I'm going to do my best. So we've got some questions. I mean, some of you will know I've been doing a tour of the diocese recently, and I've been visiting lots of your schools and talking to governors and school leaders, and a lot of these questions are coming out in the discussions that we're having. So I'm going to pose some questions to the panel, and they're going to respond to them, and then we'll give the opportunity for people to ask questions from the floor as well. So the first one we've kind of already got into, but I'm going to just to go back there, which was, and this is a question that actually came from the Governor. We're exploring the idea of a school joining a multi-academy trust, and we'd like to hear more about the tangible benefits of the education of our pupils of joining a trust. Could you articulate what the benefits of joining a trust would be for improving the outcomes for children? I think Mike's going to take that.
Okay, well, I think we've heard an immense amount from Leora about what this really affects. And so I don't want to kind of reiterate that, but all I'd like to add to it really is that we focus, as bodies, as families of schools coming together, the main drive is around the CPD and the improvement of the training of the teachers so that they can deliver fantastic teaching for the children in their care. First and foremost. Now, if we can help remove some of the distractions by making really great operational decisions and getting a fantastically trained team to support the school leaders in developing that, if we can work well with other schools to make sure that we're picking the best of what's most effective across our group of schools, then that will have an end effect for the children of an improvement in their educational experience. Now, if outcomes are purely just the measured ones, the things that we can measure, I think we're kind of falling a bit short. I think it's really the experience of children through their time in a school. And there's more rigour in it when you're working in a trust than when you're working in a good little a group of schools that you might do through a partnership or I've worked in a cluster of schools, which is great when it's going well and you're doing positive things. It's a bit harder when people need challenge or you need to really kind of dig a bit deeper because there isn't the bond between the schools that you would achieve in a trust. Fair enough?
Thank you, Mike. We're not going to ask the same question of each of the panel. We'll be relieved to hear. So we're going to move on. So we are a family of church schools. So this question has come up a lot. We like the idea of joining a multi-academy trust. However, we've worked really hard to develop our Christian character, our ethos, our values. So we want to have confidence that a MAT would respect these and we would be able to keep our school identity. How would a MAT work with us on these important aspects of our church school? I think that was going to go to John.
Thank you. I think every single one of us in here is very dedicated to our schools, whether we're the head of school or whether we're chair of the governors. And our schools really matter, and you are the head of your families, and that being your school. And I know back in 2017-16, when we were looking to joining a multi-academy trust, it was that fear of, but we don't want to lose what's special about us. And by joining a MAT, we would just get swallowed up into some sort of corporate thing that wasn't us. And we'd be made to be something that we don't want to be. And we were lucky because I'm a church school and there were 4 other schools, and actually we trusted each other enough to go on that journey together, and we were able to set up what was our MAT vision. But the key thing within our vision is that the uniqueness of each school is unique to your school. And being a church school with 4 non-church schools, it was really important to us that our Christian distinctiveness wasn't watered down at all. But equally, the non-faith schools didn't want to have Christianity imposed on them. And we had a few battles with worried trustees that might happen. But actually, living it out I find as a Christian, it's great to rub shoulders and sort of just live out my Christianness without ramming it down anyone's throat. But equally, I get to work with some amazing other heads and schools and governing bodies that have got loads of skills that add to my school, Holy Trinity. But it's all about the good of all children in our mat. But no, your uniqueness is really important, and I know, speaking for my colleagues here, they would want you to keep your uniqueness and support you in that. So yes, I would recommend that.
Thank you, John. This one was already popped up and was certainly a feature of the Surrey conference on the falling primary demographic. So we're a very small infant school with a relatively small number of pupils and staff. With the falling primary demographic in Surrey, we're struggling to attract pupils into our reception classes, which is having a detrimental effect on our school budget. What criteria would a MAT use to decide whether we could join their trust? I think that's Paul.
As you can imagine, I was delighted when this one fell to me. I think the word criteria is really unhelpful. Joining a MAT is not a pass-fail thing. And I think Leora's speech really helped with that, framing it about the greater good, the ethical leadership aspect to it, particularly in the Church of England context. You know, we are there for the greater good of the Commonwealth, as well as all the other things that go on. So I think we've got to frame it around that. And I don't think it's helpful to think that if you join a multi-academy trust, you won't face these issues, because you will. We are facing, in some of our schools, exactly the same issues you're facing around funding and pupil numbers. If it's happening in Surrey, we are feeling some of it. So we've got to be, the whole sector is facing some of these issues, not just standalone schools, as well as MATs. But I think that we would all agree that and thank you to Laura for saying this, we can't just stand still and wait for these things to happen. We've got to be proactive. And I think that's the conversation. So I put sort of 3 words I thought would be helpful in framing how we would have a conversation with any school, but particularly small schools. Firstly, relationship. We've got to be in relationship with each other, and it's good to see us all standing together. We are in relationship with each other, and it would be good to be in relationship with other schools, regardless of where we are. If we're in a relationship, we can have a conversation. And if we can have a conversation, we can find solutions. And I think that's probably how I'd frame it, rather than, are you good enough or big enough or tough enough to join? I don't think it's that conversation. Is this the right thing to do? And then thirdly, again, getting back to the ethical sort of frame about being child-centred in these conversations. And as my experience over the last few months has taught me, there are 1,000 voices. And we've got to filter those that aren't child-centred. And that's the difficult conversation sometimes. It's not about the actual education side of it. It's those other voices around the community that might not be as child-centred as we would be as school leaders. So I think the question is, joining a trust is it for the benefit of young people? And is it adding to the system and the community? They're the questions, not are you good enough, big enough, strong enough? And that will mean different things to different people in different contexts. So there isn't a straight answer to that question. It's about those conversations that happen. But if we're not talking, we can't collaborate. If we can't collaborate, we can't find solutions. So that's how I would frame the conversation. And I think, particularly working with diocese and colleagues here, we want a thriving system. We're not about thriving individual trusts, we're about a thriving system in Surrey and Guildford Diocese particularly. So those conversations and those opportunities to collaborate is where I would frame the answer.
Thank you, Paul. Okay, so moving on then. Next question is, we understand that if our school became an academy, the governing body would cease to become the legally responsible body for our school. This is a really common one that comes up. What do you see as the purposes of the new local governing committee for a school once it's joined a MAT? And I think that's Catherine.
Thanks, Alex. I wear 2 hats in answering this question. One is that I'm a serving head teacher, so I have a local governing body, and also I act as a local governor for another large multi-academy trust. And I can't praise enough the work of local governing bodies or local academy committees, because actually they're the work of ease for us. These are people who are in our communities. Certainly in the school where I'm head, I am reliant on my local governing body for their knowledge, their intonation, They have relationships in my community which are absolutely vital. They are helpful to me. They support me in decision making. And equally, my role as a local governor, I work doing my role there. We're still in classrooms. We're looking at teaching and learning. All of the things that existed as you are now, if you're not already in a multi-academy trust, are just the same. The difference being that trustees have the legal entity. However, if you have the communication, and that's what's key here, is communication, openness, honesty, transparency between trustees and local governors, that actually that flows equally and is of benefit to everybody. Certainly in my role as a local governor, I have had my eyes opened as well to the work that other local governors are doing in our trust schools. That professional development that Mike mentioned earlier with regards to staff is just the same for us who work as local governors in our schools. And we protect the Christian distinctiveness of our schools. All of those things are still there. So actually, in reality, there's very little difference. All we have is extra support and a wealth of knowledge from others.
Thank you, Catherine. So we're almost complete on the first set of questions. So this one's for Simon. One of the strengths of our school is that we have really good links with our parents, the local community, and with other local schools. How would the MAT board engage with our local community so it remained accountable for our school to its local stakeholders? I think Leora touched on this notion of academy trusts being civil structures. So I'm going to pass to Simon just to respond to that.
Yeah, that's really, obviously it's a very, very good question, all good questions. I'd go back to the role of the AQC. Fundamentally, the trust board sees we don't call them local governing bodies, we call them academy quality councils. I should have explained that. It's habitual now for me. So at that local level, we have we have students represented, we have children represented, we have staff represented, we have parents represented, and those are fundamental voices in helping us shape policy, practice, and the strategies as we develop our trust. Fundamental. And at a board level, we haven't got those eyes and ears at community level. Our values are rooted in improving the provision for the children in our community. That's why we bothered to do this. Now, we can't do that from this sort of table. You have to have this table looking down. That's why at this local level, we have to speak to our community, and we do. And we take their voices seriously. We seek that feedback regularly, very regularly, and listen to it. So it's of fundamental importance to us. And John on my left talked about, the character of schools. Why would that change in joining a trust? Why? We've been delighted to have a church school enrich our family of academies. Why would we want to change that? It's a lovely school, a successful school. In fact, I think it's the wrong end of a telescope looking at that. What can other schools and academies in our trust learn from the values of that school? That's been the journey that we're on. Now that's listening to our community, a successful school, feeding that through our policy, our guidelines, our the direction, the moral imperative that Leora spoke of. That drives our trust development. Or shall I say, I like to think that that's what it does, and that's what it should do. So.
Thank you, Simon. So we've heard from the trust leaders tonight. We've got some more questions, but the next question actually goes to Paul Schofield, who is the Deputy Regional Schools Commissioner. So Paul, if this is a school speaking, if we joined a MAT and after a few years the school's inspection judgment or reputation deteriorated, would the school be able to leave and join a different MAT? And then the second question, so I'm going to give you two, is what safeguards and assurances can MATs provide to ensure that all the schools in their trust improve over time?
Thanks, Alex.
I'll remind you of the two.
Yes, okay. Right. Yeah, that's a killer question. So, you know, of course, there are ways in which an academy can leave a trust if it came to it. But I guess I would look at it from a slightly different perspective. I think it's much better to look at it from a perspective of why you're joining a MAT in the first place. What are the benefits for you? Are you joining the right MAT? So I think what I would stress to you is, if you join the right MAT and you've done your due diligence and you're certain about their structures and processes, their school improvement, you know, everything's a risk in life, isn't it? There's always an opportunity, there's always a possibility that something you do doesn't quite work out how you thought it would work out. But I think, you know, all you can do is do that due diligence up front. Not just about whether the MAT is offering you, you know, it's the culture, the vision is right, but also those other things that Leora talked about, all of the support structures that the MAT offers. So all I can do is stress that really. And I think if you do that up front and you have those conversations in a deep, meaningful way, I think there's much more likelihood that things will not go wrong because you'll have joined a MAT that works. I mean, MATs do go wrong, of course they do. And I think when that happens, you know, we have to intervene as a department, as we would in any school. And you know, that's our role at the central government. I think there'll be other questions around that later on, which I'll come on to. But I think you know what the MAT offers is that sort of support structure and that family and that you know all of the sort of benefits that I don't want to sort of repeat what others have said. And that's why, you know, I think go into this looking at what are the opportunities for you rather than what are the risks.
Thank you, Paul. Now, we've planned for quite a number of questions, but I'm also conscious that you would also perhaps want to ask some questions of our trust leaders. So at this stage, I'm going to open it up a little bit, and then we'll come back to some of the questions that perhaps we'd planned earlier. Is there anybody that would like to either follow up on anything that they've heard so far this evening, or ask something completely different that we haven't covered? We're trying to make sure that we cover all the bases. Okay, yes.
My name is David Young. I'm the Chair of Governors at Royal Kent School in Oxford. I'm totally new to this. So the school has considered being an academy before, but before my time. So I have a few questions. As more schools seem to be becoming academies, what is the future of the local authority? Is it, you know, when the last one is left, is there a local authority to support them, or is this just something eventually through wearing people down, you're all going to have to do it because there's nobody else left? So my second question is, I'm not quite sure what a multi-academy trust are. Are you all head teachers? So are you additional costs that the school will bear? Do we save costs by not being part of the local authority? So I sort of came here, I thought, to learn about academies, and so far I'm not.
Okay, let's pick up on that first question and come back to the second. So, Leora, would you be able to respond to the first question in terms of the role of the local authority?
Yeah, so that's under active consideration at the moment in government policy. My own view is that local authorities, in relation to education, so of course I say they have lots of different functions, but in relation to education, I think you could group local authority functions in three ways: protector, convener, supporter. So the protective functions of local authority are around all the responsibilities that local authorities already have for the most vulnerable children, for children with special educational needs and disabilities, for children in the care system. So that range of responsibilities. The convening function is, I think, local authorities and local government will always have a role in shaping the place that is the local authority. And in order to do that, they need to convene other civic actors, which is why I talked about civic leadership. So they have a convening role and a way of working with schools and trusts and universities and NHS trusts, mental health trusts, to make sure that there is that coherent public services offer. And the third one is a supporter. I think there is still a role for local government in supporting education in a wider strategic sense. And I don't think local government has to maintain the schools or indeed be a provider of education in order to support the local educational economy to be as successful as it can be. So those are the three roles that I would have for local government.
Great. And I think the second question was about, if you like, the kind of perhaps the route in which people have come to be trust leaders. Before perhaps I asked them to respond to that, we've got the chairs of the trust boards with us tonight, and I wondered whether any of the chairs of the trust boards would just want to describe their sort of understanding of their MAT, because I think it's important that although we've got the trust leaders with us, behind the trust leaders stand MAT boards with MAT trustees and MAT directors. So I'm just looking into the audience. I can see Dean Diana and I can see Andrew. I think I can see Julia as well. Would any of you just like to describe your MAT chairs? Diana, do you want to just go first, but others chip in?
Thank you, Alex. I serve as the chair of the board of the Good Shepherd Trust. As Paul has said, we've got 16 schools. The question of how do we support the schools? It is about being able to know them well, we want to be an employer of choice, so there's that opportunity for colleagues who are schools based to be able to exercise a breadth of their specialisms in their subjects, so their pedagogy, also to be able to move around and get further experience, so in perhaps another sector or an age phase that's not possible in one school alone. The way that we are organised currently in 4 hubs, we also are able to support the head teachers in their schools with more hands-on, with a hub leader, being able to know their schools really well. And the focus on all of that work together is school improvement. And so heads working together all the time with our hub leaders. Certainly our CEO, and they'll speak for themselves, Paul is a former head teacher. He teaches maths, but we'll let him off. He's a former head teacher of a secondary school. And certainly we would expect that kind of leadership certainly to come from within the board as well, so that we've got a good triangulation of what it is, the questions that we're asking, and to be able to make sure that the education of the children is first and foremost in all the decisions that we take.
Thank you, Diana. I've also spotted Helen at the back, who's chair of Enlightened Trust, which I'll come to you.
Hello, I'm Helen Coulson. I am the chair of the Enlightened Learning Trust, which is soon to be a trust of 4 schools, so consists of a secondary school and 4 infants and junior schools. I think specifically I'd just like to add to what Diana has already said. You were talking, the question was specifically around perhaps how trusts work, what the sort of kind of layers there are within the trust. As you're probably aware, with a local authority school, your funding comes via the local authority with a proportion that's taken out in order to fund the services that the local authority provides or buys into to support local authority schools. That funding element that's taken out doesn't happen anymore, and the funding comes directly to the trust. So it works in a very similar way. We can generate great economies of scale, but we can also generate great investment for schools should we need to do that. Because I think, as was mentioned very early on, we are charitable custodians. It is public money that we are entrusted with, and we need to spend it on children's education for the benefit of them.
Thanks, Helen. Coming to Andrew.
Thanks, Alex. Sorry, I'm Andrew Needham. I'm the chair of the Prospect Trust and work with Simon. So, hi. Sorry, I'm getting very strange sat down here. This is really interesting. I think the first thing I would say to everybody here is, if you're going to have a conversation with the trust, really start to try and understand how that trust works and what it's trying to do. Because I'm pretty sure that not all trusts are the same. They all have different priorities. Obviously, collaboration is at the centre of it. But I think that will be important to understand what you think you can contribute and what they can contribute to you. We're quite an unusual trust, because as Simon mentioned, we were founded from essentially a sixth form college, So at Sixth Form College, we have a vision that really is around school improvement and around supporting students and young people, and from the age of from being young children, so year 3 right through to 18 years old, and our whole vision is really around how you can help children progress and develop, working through junior school, secondary school, through to Sixth Form College. And initially, I'll be honest, I'm a finance person by profession, so I'm really interested to hear a lot of conversation today about this. I was kind of, not cynical, but I was anxious when we were setting up the trust as to whether this could really work. And I heard the stuff around, back office, and, you can eliminate some of the duplication of things that happens in different academies and schools. And, there's a bit of a prize to be had there, but it's not significant. What has really been rewarding, I've seen, is the stuff that's been done around school improvement. And when you get, I've come from a meeting today, we've had a big strategic board meeting today. We've had the principal of a Sixth Form College sitting next to a principal of a secondary school, sitting next to the principal of a junior school, who are all very familiar with each other, who are talking about safeguarding, are talking about how you can help students, the curriculum, how you can help teachers, how you can have teachers from a Sixth Form College working and better understanding what goes on in a secondary school, how you can have teachers in a secondary school better understand and know what's going on in a junior school, to a level that's far higher than just normal routine collaboration. And honestly, we've all come away today so encouraged by the benefits that's happening and that's how that's working together. So I think what the trust does, as far as we're concerned, it can take away from the teachers, a lot of the other responsibilities in terms of all of the sort of boring back office stuff, and enable them and all the teachers to really focus and work together on how they can improve their schools, but really how they can improve the outcomes for the young students. And I think what we've done there is seems to be working. Touch wood. That's what Simon tells me anyway.
Julie, talk about it.
Just very briefly. I won't go on much longer on this question, but just to add, I think from our point of view, because we're slightly unusual, that we're still a single school in our multi-academy trust. And so, to go back to the question, yes, our CEO is also a head teacher. And it goes back to, I think, what Laura was really making clear. It's about the scale and economies of scale, and we would not remove Catherine from her head teacher role until we felt there was a point in time where it was appropriate to do that. So I think leading the trust and leading a school can be very rewarding for all parties.
Thank you, Julia. Okay, I'm conscious of time. I've got 2 questions which do come up, which are particularly related to church schools, which I'm just going to go back to the panel on. The first one is our governing body has worked hard to build up a governor's fund to help support the school with special projects and things that the school budget could not afford. What happens to these funds if our school joined the MAT? And I think, Catherine, you were in the frame for that one. Can you just talk to us about that?
I just want their money. No. Yes, just to sort of add into that is about the collaboration. Do you want to say that? Thank you. As you've heard from all colleagues around here today, it's that collaboration. Is if you buy into the MAT, you buy into the education of all the pupils in the MAT. It's for the good of everybody. And each school will have its own priorities and needs. So scribbling away your own money doesn't necessarily buy into the ethics of this is a benefit to everybody. A couple of examples of schools that I work with in a trust of benefiting was there was a school that had quite tragic circumstances with leadership in their school. And actually, as being a part of the MAT, they were able to secure leadership from within the MAT who were able to support them going forwards, as opposed to having to dig into any money. Had they not been part of the MAT, they would have struggled to be able to afford that, to access that. I know many of you may have saved money for capital projects in your schools. You want to improve the buildings. I know certainly as a previous VA head, we did a lot of that work. But actually moving forwards, when you pool your money, so you're pooling your governance fund into the Academy Trust funds, but actually there are processes and due diligence in place to see which are the priorities in which school. I mean, those decisions are always made in the best interest of the education of the children, and priorities come up. There are also funds available through the DFE for multi-academy trusts as well. So should your school desperately need a new roof, etc., there are SIF bids and funds to access that. But essentially, your money needs to be pooled. That's the ethics that you buy into in a multi-academy trust. It's about the common good for all.
Thank you, Catherine. And then a final one, which was related to voluntary aided schools. Our governors have to pay 10% of any capital project undertaken to improve our school buildings. What happens when you join a MAT? Anyone like to pick that one up? Because you're all got church schools in your MAT. Paul?
Yeah, we've probably got the biggest portfolio of church schools, just from the scale point of view. It depends on the size of the MAT, so we access different pots of money depending on the size of the MAT, number of children in the MAT. So we get a certain amount of money from the DFE for capital projects because we're of size, and it works the same. The money comes in, so we don't have the 10%. But as Catherine really helpfully said, that money that comes in, we prioritise those schools that are most in need, often around submersion safeguarding. School gates seem to be the favourite ones. They're taking a finger off or something, but those things need to be prioritised. And when we've done that, we then look at the probably called the nice projects, things we would love to do every day, but we often don't have the money. But that 10% goes, and it's about the greater good. And it's from our as working collaboratively, as Catherine said, as a family, you make those decisions together. So when we're talking about how we allocate the funds, head teachers are in that conversation as well as people at trust level. So we try and do it as a family with schools, and that would be the same.
Thank you, Paul. Just to add to what Paul said, when a MAT reaches a certain size and scale, it qualifies for capital funding, which comes directly down to the trust from the Department of Education, and that's the way that those capital projects are then rolled out across the MAT sector. So I think there are quite a number of VA schools in the audience, so I think that was a useful thing to perhaps to cover off. Right, we've got time for one more question from the audience before we wrap up. There's quite a few hands, so I'm going to go. I think there's a colleague over here, and then perhaps I'll just go to the back before we finish.
Hi. You've all mentioned quite a lot about schools that are joining you. Some of you have had schools that have joined very recently. Enlighten mentioned 3 more that are due to join you too. How would you manage the growth of your trust, particularly if the focus is on school improvement? I mean, there's a lot of us here today, and if we're all in your pipeline, you're going to have, 15 schools each. So how would you manage that?
I feel like that's focused at me. We had a bit of eye contact there. I'd say there is some tension there, because obviously if we were to put in place this month, the coming months, a team that is of sufficient size to welcome 10 schools over the next year or two, and do all the work that is required of that, then that would be prohibitively expensive, and schools would say, well, actually, we don't want to join that trust because you've got this huge team in the middle that we feel is beyond the size that's required. And yet, on the other side, if schools want to join, they obviously are expecting to have the kind of skills and support of a team that is going to offer them something that is greater than they're possibly currently experiencing. So what I'd say is we have a plan to increase, there's some tension in how we grow, at the same time as providing a really good service to the schools that join. It's not easy. There are some growth funds available, but they're very hard to do unless we're sponsoring schools that need a huge amount of support. And many of those schools actually have already been supported and joined trusts. So really what I'd say is we grow at the same time as the schools join us, getting slightly ahead of that. It's a little bit like a startup where you kind of prime your central team a little bit, but we do so very carefully and in a way that we know adds value to the schools that are there. And just as an example, we have a dedicated business leader who used to work for the local authority, has got experience of supporting schools. I think that would be common for many of us. We're able to support through a dedicated HR person who works. She's at the end of the phone for any of the schools that are, the schools that are in the trust. And so the skill level of that small team for any of us is higher possibly than a school could manage to have on its own. Does that help answer it? And if there were an easier answer, I'd love to have it, but can you see the tension that we're under? Thank you.
It does actually neatly fit into the last part of this evening, which is actually about the diocesan strategy. Sarah, you had your hand shot up. Do you want to just take the last question, then I'll wrap up.
Thank you, Alex. And my question is directed to Paul Schofield. I'm hearing a lot of collaboration tonight, and as a head teacher, I've been completely with that philosophy, but unfortunately, I'm experiencing competition. So my local MAT has expanded and was allowed to expand through the RSC, and I had, thank you, replied to tell me, but as an academy, they can do that. So as a result, our school and our local schools are now fighting for places. The birth rate, as we all know, in this particular area is diminishing, and the places on offer have increased because the RSC allowed that. So I need reassurance that this collaboration between, not just within a MAT, but between MATs, is there for all of us. Whilst it might take us a year or two for schools to actually join academies, we're fighting quite a stiff competition for what seem quite powerful MATs in the area. Can we have some reassurance on that? Thank you.
Lots of nods in the room, Paul.
Yeah.
No pressure.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out I only joined in April. Obviously part of our functions are to ensure that there are sufficient school places, and we do look at when we make decisions, we're trying to make decisions based on projections, pupil projections. So I can assure you going forward, it's not in anyone's interests where we've got falling roles starting to appear for us to sort of add to that problem. So, that's certainly something.
But you have added to it.
Well,
a school is doubled in size, and we're all now fighting for our budgets for the children to take up those places.
I can only make a commitment on going forward, and my role going forward. That's certainly what we'll be aiming to do. I don't know the circumstances of your case. I'm sorry, but obviously, the decision was taken at the time for whatever reason. But going forward, I think we are committed to a structure and systems where people do collaborate, and we don't want to exacerbate surplus place issues.
Are you in Farnham? Yes.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you, Sarah, for shining a light on that particular issue, which I think applies to a number of areas across both Surrey and the diocese, actually. So, colleagues, to finish then, just briefly, that question that was asked a moment ago is really helpful because it leads us into a discussion about what the diocese is doing and what the diocesan strategy is about. And these are the three priorities which the Board of Education has settled on after reviewing its school organisation strategy. And I just want to go back and say that the diocese responsibilities is very different to the responsibilities of local authorities. And listening to what Leora said this evening, I think it's really, really important that the diocese actually sets out a clear strategic vision and direction for you, so you know what we're thinking and you know where we stand. I think one of the most frustrating things about the Surrey conference was, having spoken to lots of head teachers and governors after the event, the feedback was that it just didn't feel like the local authority had a view, and actually how does that work and how does that then translate? So school organisation, and in particular the falling primary demographic, is going to be something that's going to require all of us to work together. And I think, Sarah, your question a moment ago is a really good example of when that doesn't work well. So going forward, these are the three things that we are committed to working with you on, and it is definitely a joint journey between the diocese and all of our church schools. So firstly, to actively support and promote the growth of church maths, which is what we've been doing this evening, and giving the opportunity to join and experience the benefits. And I think it's been really interesting listening to Leora with a national perspective, but also listening to the trust leaders. We also want to accelerate the work that you're already doing as governing bodies on helping you to make really wise strategic decisions. And those decisions are not decisions for the next year. I would suggest they're not even decisions for the next 3 years. I think they're decisions which will mean that there is a school in your community for the next 50 years, 100 years and beyond. So we're talking about decisions which will mean that there is a school in your community that serves children and families going forward for the long term. And then the final bit is that, as we've talked about, the local authorities' responsibilities are different to ours, but actually we can't do it unless we work with our local authorities. So as you know, the diocese actually works with Surrey, Hampshire and Kingston. We have one church school in Kingston. So actually part of that is actually encouraging the local authority to come forward and to look at some of the difficult issues related to place planning. And that's in a number of places across the diocese. So Farnham is one, but Mole Valley and Dorking is another. I could go on. So those are the priorities that we're committed to working with you on. And in terms of next steps, these are the things that we're going to suggest that you take away from this evening. First of all, consider the context of your church school and the different models of structured collaboration, partnerships, including thinking about joining an academy trust. Encourage your governing body to horizon scan. I didn't share this with Leora before she spoke, but it was interesting that we both ended up using the same term. Horizon scanning is absolutely key to the survival of your school. Think about where you want your church school to be in 3, 5, even 10 years' time. Identify the opportunities, the challenges and the risks to the sustainability of your church school. The thing that really spooked me the other week was seeing a slide that said, option 1, do nothing. Option 1, doing nothing, is not going to help us, colleagues. We must get out of that mindset. We need to plan for the future. And I think actually in some ways, identifying where you want to be and working backwards from that is a really good place to start. 4, discuss the different options at your governing body meetings and then put in place a strategic plan which sets out a roadmap. Be intentional. Consult with the DBE, the diocese, before making decisions, taking decisions. And then finally, read the Shaping Our Future strategy, the letter that came to you at the beginning of this term setting out the DBE's criteria for academy conversion, and do come and check in with us if you are talking to other schools about the possible direction of travel that you're taking, particularly if you are gathering schools together with a view to forming a MAT. I can't underline that enough. I think that's a really important thing, that we check in with you on any proposals to form a MAT. As you've heard tonight, we've got 5 trusts in our diocese already. Paul Stoke and I were talking before we started, saying actually across Surrey, we probably have enough MATs now for all schools and certainly all church schools to join. So there needs to be a really strong case for forming another MAT, particularly within this part of the South East. And finally, to make that all easier for you, over the summer we've created a new microsite. Now this is just a screenshot from it, and you can see the address at the bottom. But if you go to this microsite, there is a link to all of the 5 trusts that are working with church schools in our diocese. And that site then links you through to their websites. And there's a summary of every trust in our diocese on that microsite. So if you want a starting point, after this meeting, I would suggest that you go and have a look at that microsite. Easy address to remember, DSP, Diocesan Schools Partnership, and then you can go and have a look at the individual sites of the 5 trusts in our diocese. Okay, I hope that's been a helpful evening. I'd like to thank on your behalf all of the trust leaders who've come tonight and been part of the panel. Also to Paul for giving up his time to come on behalf of the Regional Schools Commissioner. And I'm going to pass over to Matthew, my deputy, who's going to give a vote of thanks to Leora.
Thanks, Alex. So, Leora, thank you for being with us today. Certainly hope that people it's been valuable. I think Leora's really added to our thinking, and we really welcome your knowledge, your wisdom that you bring into the room today, but also your honesty and your passion that's really come out today for that sense of schools working together collaboratively. And hopefully it's ignited that little bit in us to carry on that conversation, to take those next steps forward as we face the challenges that lie ahead and we address those next steps that Alex was talking about. So really value your input today, and thank you for being with us.
Just want to give Leora a chance to respond, but also we hope very much to carry on working with you, Leora, as you move forward in your role as CEO of CST.